Hey everyone, welcome to Moving Matt. We do all things cameras with a dash of vlogs and a little bit of travel. And today is finally the day that the Canon EOS R3 has been officially announced. So obviously Canon does not know who I am, so I did not have the Canon EOS R3 in my hands. But I did wake up early this morning and have sifted through most of the reviews that I've seen online. So I'm going to go over what I found interesting from those reviews and also talk about what are the things that may have surprised us, because we knew a whole lot about this camera going into it. So what are a few of the things that may have surprised us? And more importantly than going over what surprised us, because really there's not that much there, I will be going over how does this camera actually perform in the modes that we know it already has. So starting off with the sensor size, it does have that 24.1 megapixel sensor size. Pretty much everybody knew at this point that that's what it was going to be, but it's been completely officially announced at this point that yes, it has that 24.1 megapixel sensor. This is also Canon's first backside illuminated stack sensor, and it is developed and manufactured by Canon. There was some confusion going on about whether this was actually being manufactured by Canon or was this actually going to be a Sony sensor that maybe they just gave in the specs that they really wanted and it's quote unquote developed by them. But that is not the case. This is a Canon sensor. Going along with that, it shoots 30 frames per second electronic and 12 frames per second with the mechanical shutter. Now, from what I've seen, most people are saying that you really just do not need the mechanical shutter function. Really, the electronic shutter is how this camera is meant to be used, and it's set to that by default. A pleasant surprise that we have from this camera is that those 30 frames per second in the electronic is actually 14-bit RAW, which is very impressive. Now, the Sony Alpha 1 only shoots a 12-bit RAW. Granted, it is shooting that at 50 megapixels, but I guess I was thinking that maybe Canon would want a fanboy win and say, oh, we have 14-bit RAW instead of 12-bit. I don't know. I just figured that information was worth throwing out there. I don't know if it matters that much to me personally. Which, honestly, I'm not going to buy this camera, so I guess none of it matters to me personally. Now, an extremely important feature for sports and wildlife photography is the rolling shutter, and that was a little bit of a question of how the rolling shutter would actually perform. Well, it seems to be performing very well. Jared Polin said that it's somewhere between the Alpha A9 and the Alpha 1. So, I mean, that's a very good performance, and I'm thinking that most people will be very happy with the rolling shutter performance from what I've seen. Now, I did see that the rolling shutter in video still seems to be a little bit of wobble, but I mean, we do not have a global shutter yet, so that can be expected at this point. Now, moving over to the autofocus, it seems to be excellent, like pretty much everybody knew it would be. Now, along with the human and animal eye autofocus tracking, it also now has the motorsport tracking, and this seems to be working very well as expected in a way. I mean, they have never done the motorsport tracking, so it was kind of hard to say whether or not this would perform, but it seems to be performing quite well. Also, this does have the new eye tracking autofocus. I like to call it watch me, watch you autofocus. Now, I think this seems pretty interesting feature, and for the most part, from all the reviews I was hearing, that people really seem to like it. Now, I did see one review where they were saying that it didn't work with everybody in their crew's eye as well as it worked with some people, which I guess, I mean, it can kind of be expected. This is new technology, but supposedly the more you use this eye autofocus or eye autofocus, it gets even better and better because it gets more data points and learns the way you use this autofocus. It also allows you to create different profiles. So if you have it for maybe a sunny day, or, you know, I don't know, they had different settings that you can actually customize into it. So I thought that that was very cool and kind of a surprise. You're also able to save all your customization to an SD card. So if you need to transfer it between cameras, you'll have all that information right there and you won't have to take time to set it all up again. Now, one of the concerns that I've had from people in the comments was, if you're using this eye tracking autofocus and you're trying to compose your shot, how would it work? Would it just be running over here to be focusing here when you're trying to get a grand picture of things? But it doesn't seem like that is actually going to be the case. So the way it seems to be working is, if you look at a subject, you're able to look at that subject and then you half press the shutter down. And when you do that, it locks on to that subject and it will continue to track that subject until you either, continue taking the pictures or let your finger off the shutter. I think this sounds excellent. I think it sounds like great new technology, and I hope to see it get even better in the future. Now, this autofocus does not seem to be working in video just yet. I do think it would be a great feature for video, so let's hope that they put it in there eventually. Now, speaking of video, let's jump over there right now. This does have up to 6K 60 RAW. Now, from my understanding, it only shoots 6K 60 in the RAW format, and it doesn't look like you have just 6K in regular format, but I could be wrong, but that's the impression I've got from all the different reviews. And that RAW is shot in C-Log 3. This does not have C-Log 1 and 3 like the Canon R5 does. Now, most people will use C-Log 3 if they have the option, but personally I enjoy using just the regular C-Log sometimes because it's very easy to grade for and it's a fast turnover time. So I wish they would add that as well, but I guess this is a very professional camera and most professionals would want to be using C-Log 3, so it's really not that big of a deal. Now, this does do 4K oversampled from that 6K, so supposedly it looks very good, and it shoots that at up to 60 frames per second. It also shoots 4K 120, but it does that in a line skipped mode, but supposedly it's better than the R5's line skipped mode for their 120. Now, as far as overheating goes, I'd say inconclusive. Most likely it does not overheat, or from what I've seen in most scenarios, it does not overheat. Gordon Lang actually was able to put it for, I think it was 6 hours. He had it at the 4K oversampled, and he had it at 25p, which is, you know, R24p if you're from the United States. And he shot it for 6 hours with no overheating, and that was basically the limit, is 6 hours. Now, another welcome thing is it does not have the 30-minute record time. Finally, that got rid of that, and so it gives me hope for the Canon cameras moving forward that they will get rid of that arbitrary 30-minute record limit. I think that that's absolutely ridiculous. Now, the reason I say that the overheating is inconclusive at this point is because Dpreview did have an overheating warning when they were shooting at 4K 120. This happened about 40 minutes after they were shooting it in primarily stills. They gave it over and shot it in video, and it shot only like about a 1 minute in the 4K 120, and then it started to overheat. Now, I am thinking that it was probably because it was outside in a very hot environment. It looked like they were shooting soccer games, so more than likely the sun had been beating down on it for a long time, and that's why it got that overheating warning. Now, whether or not it would have shut down or not, we do not know, because they did not want to take that risk because they had a very limited time with that camera. Now, at the same time, I do also wonder if they had the temperature set to high, because it allows you to set the temperature to high and let it kind of burn a little hotter. I would assume that they would have set their temperature to high because they really know what they're doing, but it's also a possibility that with the short amount of time, they just had a little bit of oversight and it was just set to standard, and maybe if they would have switched it to high, they would have never had that problem in the first place. Also, they were using a pre-production model, so maybe in the production model with the most recent firmware, you will not get that problem at all, and that may be the discrepancy between Gordon Lang and Dpreview. Now, in my opinion, I don't think this camera is going to have much problem with overheating just because of the bigger body and some of the lessons that they've had to learn from the R5. It may have some problems with overheating because every camera can have some problems with overheating, but for the most part, I'm going to say that this camera probably doesn't overheat. Maybe, hopefully, cross our fingers. So one of the big questions that's still on my mind is, how's the dynamic range? I did not see it posted anywhere about having great dynamic range. I didn't see anybody even mention the dynamic range. And to me, as a primarily videographer, dynamic range is very important for me. So I wonder how the dynamic range will be on this camera. I would assume it will be at least as good as the R5. I would think it would be even better having the 24 megapixels and also having the stacked sensor, but for some reason that was never mentioned. It wasn't mentioned in any of the marketing material that I could find or any of the reviews. So it makes me a little skeptical on how it actually performs. But maybe people just haven't had enough time with this thing and they're just trying to hit all the highlights. but I would really like to know how the dynamic range works. But those are the highlights that interested me the most about this camera. Have you been paying attention to this camera yourself? Have you watched any of the reviews? Are you excited about this camera? Do you think that from what you've seen, it warrants the $6,000 price tag? I think that that's maybe a little excessive personally, but drop in the comments and let me know your thoughts about this camera. Are you gonna buy it? Are you gonna pass? And if you've liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And until next time, peace.